welcome back. Well, fears of a second wave of coronavirus are becoming reality, with a spike of at least 116 fresh cases in the last 24 hours as infections have been detected across the country. Now, today, the relevant ministers will meet to discuss the education system, with already 31 schools closed and tens of thousands of students and teachers sent into quarantine. Now, authorities are calling on residents to continue social distancing, hygiene measures and wearing face masks in public, with testing stations being set up in various locations, checking people even if they're not displaying symptoms. And our correspondent Owen Alterman is standing by for us in Tel Aviv at one of these drive-through testing stations. Owen, good morning. Walk us through what you're seeing there on the ground. We really do know that the government is pushing for more tests to be done.
That's right, Sarah. And the open question is that happening? As you mentioned, the gates have been opened. You can also see some of the cars, I believe, driving behind me as they're going through this drive-in testing center in Tel Aviv, one of 4 drive-in testing centers around the country. There are also, by the way, many other centers that you can come to on foot, or by other means. You don't have to drive through with your own car. But you're right, the big news over the last week, in addition, unfortunately, with the rise in numbers of those who have been testing positive for the coronavirus, has been the opening up of testing, for example, to those who do not show symptoms, but were in close contact with someone else who tested positive. As you well know, Sarah, over the past few months, there's been a lot of debate here in Israel, as there has been elsewhere, about how many tests to do, what the criteria should be for the testing. And there has been a push to open it up, and that push has now been answered by the new health minister, Yuli Edelstein, and by the health ministry as a whole. Again, allowing those tests. Should say that we were told earlier today that over the past few days, the center has been open since Sunday in this round of testing. About 160 have come through each day. I will say cautiously that as the center is opened at 9 o'clock, we've seen it just for about an hour, I suspect the numbers might be a bit up at this center, at least for today, maybe showing that more people are getting testing. Hopefully, Sarah, not showing that more people are getting sick.
All right, Owen. And we have heard the Israeli government come out to say if indeed there is a second wave of coronavirus and people don't stick to these measures which have been laid out, then another lockdown will be brought in. Tell me, what could we expect that to look like without really damaging the economy too much?
Listen, Sarah, obviously it's anyone's guess and it will depend on the facts and on the numbers, but I suspect we won't go back to the lockdown that was, with a 100-meter radius from each of our homes, with a 500-meter radius to go and exercise, with small stores closed. Keep in mind that the vast majority of the cases in what has been happening over the past week have been focused on the educational system, on middle and high schools. Yes, there have been some cases elsewhere. It's also true we don't yet know the impact of the opening, for example, of restaurants and hotels. There are, of course, some other openings planned in a few weeks. But I suspect we won't go back to the full-on lockdown that we had, for example, in March or in parts of April, that if there is another set of closings, that it will be more selective, potentially centered around schools. As you know, that's been a big debate here in Israel over the past few days. But, of course, we have to emphasize it depends on the facts, it depends on the criteria, and, of course, it depends on the worldviews and the thoughts of the decision-makers themselves.
Certainly a lot of variables there. Owen Alterman in Tel Aviv, thank you for the update. Moving on, and dozens of cities across the United States are facing another night of curfews as violent scenes like this one continue to play out on the streets as protests over the killing of unarmed black man George Floyd enter their 8th day. Now, video footage that you can see here shows police firing tear gas into crowds of people while the military has been sent into some cities. Minneapolis, where the incident unfolded, is now facing a major investigation, and as Nadia Romero reports, the unrest is showing no sign of letting up.
This is the first time that the state is launching a civil rights investigation into the systemic discriminatory practices of the largest police department in the state.
A civil rights investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department will look back at the department's practices for the past decade.
This effort is only one of many steps to come in our efforts to restore trust within those communities who have been unseen, unheard.
The mother of George Floyd's 6-year-old daughter spoke out Tuesday.
He will never see her grow up, graduate. He will never walk down the aisle. If it's a problem she's having and she needs her dad, she does not have that anymore.
In the nation's capital, protesters gathered outside of the heavily guarded White House, a very stark contrast in images from Monday, when police used force and launched tear gas to push protesters away from the White House as President Trump threatened to use the military against protesters.
How dare you pervert the honor of our military by threatening to use them against their fellow Americans?
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell dodged weighing in on the handling of Monday's protest.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to critique other people's performances.
Democratic presidential hopeful Joe Biden is once again speaking out, this time about Trump's handling of the crisis and also about his staged photo op in front of a charred church.
When peaceful protesters dispersed in order for a president from the doorstep of the People's House, the White House, using tear gas and flash grenades in order to stage a photo op in one of the most historic churches in the country, or at least in Washington, D.C. We can be forgiven for believing the president's more interested in power than in principle, more interested in serving the passions of his base than the needs of the people in his care. For that's what the presidency is, the duty to care for all of us, not just those who vote for us, but all of us, not just our donors, but all of us.
Reuters releasing a poll with the results showing that the majority of Americans, 64% in fact, sympathise with the protests, while many disapprove of the response of the president, while 27% say they don't know, while 9% say they're also unsure. Meanwhile, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is defending his decision to allow Trump to use his public platform to threaten violence against protesters. Now, the New York Times reporting that during a video call with Facebook staff on Tuesday, Zuckerberg told them that his decision not to remove Trump's warning that when the looting starts, the shooting starts was tough but pretty thorough. Now, the move being slammed by civil rights groups and Facebook staff who then staged a walkout. Now, as the world watches in horror at the scenes unfolding in the US, neighbouring Canada is also in shock, with its Prime Minister Justin Trudeau offering this response when asked about the situation between police and protesters.
You've been reluctant to comment on the words and actions of the U.S. president, but we do have Donald Trump now calling for military action against protesters. We saw protesters tear gas yesterday to make way for a presidential photo op. I'd like to ask you what you think about that, and if you don't want to comment, what message do you think you're sending?
We all watch in horror and consternation what's going on in the United States. It is a time to pull people together, but it is a time to listen. It is a time to learn what injustices continue despite progress over years and decades. But it is a time for us as Canadians to recognize that we too have our challenges, that Black Canadians and racialized Canadians face discrimination as a lived reality every single day. There is systemic discrimination in Canada, which means our systems treat Canadians of color, Canadians who are racialized, differently than they do others.
Caught in the middle of the George Floyd unrest are the owners of small businesses which are being targeted by looting crowds. In some cases, these owners have found themselves having to defend their property, risking their physical safety to safeguard their economic well-being. Earlier in the program, I spoke to Giuliano Tomasi of Joe's Pizza. Let's take a listen.
what happened in the world was wrong. It was a wrong thing. To protest and stand up for your rights is one thing, but a lot of the businesses around here are small businesses. They're family-owned, just like us. You know, all we want to do is make money, pay our bills, be friendly to one another, and go home. This is completely unnecessary, everything that happened. You're destroying people's livelihood. People work their whole lives just to create something to support them and their family, and it's getting destroyed in one night. I think it was boiling. It came to a boiling point. You know, after someone takes so much, I understand that they get very angry and frustrated. But like I said, we're all people. We're all human. We all make mistakes.
Right.
We should just respect and love one another and move forward, build, not destroy.
Now, despite the grim reality of the scenes playing out across the US, one ray of light is emerging from the streets of Flint, Michigan, where Sheriff Christopher Swanson has become a worldwide sensation, speaking with gathered protesters and joining them in solidarity. My colleague David Matlin had the privilege of speaking to him just a few hours ago.
Well, I can tell you, I wish I had a plan and I wish I strategized and that was the answer, but it really wasn't. You know, I don't want to seem macho or like I'm some kind of superhero. You know, when you're in the field, as long as I am, 27 years actually today, and you work in an environment where you are used to high stress situations, I got to be honest, it didn't even cross my mind. When I took my helmet off, it was an act of vulnerability in order for me to show that group of people that were highly charged with righteous anger, that I will lay down my sword and I will come to them and I will ask them. The risk benefit was improportional because I knew if I was able to talk and get some cooperation that we could turn it around, because it was right on the edge of popping.
You know, along those lines now, as an officer of the law, what's your message, if I can put you at a grandstand here, what's your message to this desperate nation right now?
Our nation is hurting, and our world is hurting. We're all involved in a pandemic. We're all involved in our own issues, but in the United States, you got to have faith in your people, and the people have the faith in their law enforcement. And in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that was erased. Years and years of community police relations. I'm going to ask the cops, don't give up on the community. Even in big cities like LA, New York, and Dallas, and those that are fighting, just don't give up on the community. We are the people's guardian. We're there to care for them. And I'm begging the people, don't give up on your police. Don't give up on the ones that are in our communities that are there to take care. Of course, we have bad situations and we have bad people, but Mr. Floyd, George Floyd, changed American policing, and give us a chance to prove that we could talk to our community and we can have an understanding and change culture. You saw what happened in Flint, Michigan, and it can happen everywhere.
And that is all we have time for this edition of I-24 News. I'm Sarah Coates. We'll be back at the top of the hour.